It's great to be here with the ACL Year-Round Mentorship. We have some great panelists and continuing our series of discussions around topics of interest, primarily for NLP students or aspiring NLP students. And today's topic is how to find a good advisor. What we are going to do is go around and hear from our panelists a brief introduction and some initial thoughts around the topic of finding a great advisor, whether inspired by their own experience or maybe thoughts they accumulated along the way. And then we'll just move on with questions. And you can use the Q&A button at the bottom to ask questions. And we'll just go from there. So maybe we can start with Divya, if you want to introduce yourself, where you are, maybe where you got your degree, and any thoughts you have to share.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Divya Chimnepa. I'm a research scientist at Thomson Reuters. So I'm working on legal natural language processing. So all sorts of NLP stuff, but on legal data. And I received my PhD from the University of North Texas in fall 2019. So yeah, is that enough? Should I go more? Yeah.
I think if you wanted to share any initial thoughts on,
yeah,
I don't know, your own advice. I mean, not your own advisor, not to point at people necessarily, but your own experience in finding advisor and any thoughts you have to share with others around that.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing there is to be have a very clear communication of what is expected from the advisor and what actually we are looking from them. So I've noticed some people are very self-motivated and some people want to be always, some people wanted to be guided, like especially in the current scenario, there are so many people with many ACL papers, even in their undergrads. So I've seen students who are just looking for an advisor and not necessarily, expecting guidance for projects. But when I joined as a PhD student, I was very interested in NLP, but I did not know much about how to do an NLP project. So I was clear of my expectation to my professor, to my supervisor, and my professor also knew how to handle me or what I should do. So there was a very clear communication. Like he knew that I have not worked on NLP projects before, but I'm interested in NLP. So that kind of communication was very helpful for me. So I think it's very important to be very truthful of what we are expecting from our professor. And yeah, so I think communication is the key there.
Well, thank you. Federico, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm Federico Bianchi. I'm currently a postdoc at Stanford. I recently moved here, I think 2 weeks ago, more or less. I did my PhD in Italy, in University Milano Bicocca, and I got my PhD in early 2020, right before the start of the pandemic. So I actually was able to defend in presence before the actual pandemic. And my experience with advisor has always been pretty good. I've been always able to find very good people to work with. I strongly believe that an advisor is both a mentor, but also kind of a research collaborator, because it's someone you work with and you do research with. So it's someone that is meant to guide you and to give you some indication on what you need to fix during the course of your PhD life, what's okay, what's not, which are the good research direction. And this is why I want to go back to what we said before. I think communication is key, being able to communicate, to effectively communicate, get feedback, and being able to improve in this direction is very important. So I think the most important kind of skill you want in your advisor is the somehow capabilities of being a good communicator with you and to build a good relationship. I think that having a good relationship with the advisor is very important.
Yeah, thanks, Federico. And David, do you want to introduce yourself and share your thoughts?
Sure. I'm David Jurgens. I'm an assistant professor over at the University of Michigan. I did my PhD at UCLA, was a research scientist at Sapienza University in Rome, did a postdoc at McGill and one at Stanford as well. So I think along the way, I got to see a lot of different advising styles. And now I've been fortunate to be advising 6 PhD students of my own. And I thought I knew a little bit until I started advising my own students. And then I realized that I didn't know as much as I thought. I think the other two panelists' comments on communication is really spot on. I think that there's also this hesitancy that, at least when I was a PhD student, it's like, oh, my advisor style must be the one that I need, or that there's some like right advising style. And I think some of what the communication really helps is to know what you want, or if you don't know what you want, to be really open and transparent about what is like going well or poorly in that regard. So I think it's kind of a fun, but also sometimes challenging opportunity to have those conversations and a chance for growth.
Well, thank you. I think we had some issue with
I will deal with
a
that.
couple. Yeah, I removed one, removing the other person, and apologies to everyone for that. So we can take questions. I'm reminding everyone we can take questions from the to the Q&A button at the bottom. And I see there is a question regarding conference attendance, given that NACL is coming up next week. If you have any suggestions on how to reach out to professors for schools that students would be interested in applying to. So what would be a good way to start a communication with a potential advisor given a conference like NACL next week? Whoever wants to take it, and we can hear from multiple people. So
Yeah, I can say what I did. I emailed professors, and we could ask for a time slot, like when they are available during the conference, and maybe connect with them during the conference. That's the simplest way I can think of. Like maybe, yeah, go on.
No, sorry. Like I was just saying that I think like most people are happy to talk, and during coffee breaks is like generally a great moment to just interact with people you don't know, and you probably like every only about on Twitter. So like I think it's coffee break are a great moment in which you can approach people and say, yeah, I like what you do. Let's talk a bit. And then maybe like you can find specific time during the day to actually allocate half an hour in which you can talk more in detail. So yes.
I guess I'll add 2 pieces of advice. I get my own undergrads. So I really like email folks. I think sometimes as faculty, you get a lot of emails, and I'm just drowning in emails all the time. So if you title the email like, "Are you going to be at NACL 2022?" I'm much more likely to read that, even if I don't know who you are, because I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm going to NACL 2022. And then I'm like, oh, this is helpful. So that's one way to get a little bit of signal. I think the other thing, aside from doing meetings, if you're going to schedule a meeting, like pick a really obvious place to meet, because it's always hard to find people. Like that simple like logistic of let's meet by the banister for this company, and like in the thing. So much easier than like let's find a time. And maybe like a soft skill of just like, it's really intimidating to go to lunch if you're not new to like a conference and you don't know many folks. But if you see someone, just be like, hey, are you going to lunch? Can I join you all? Just like go with some big group. And that's a great way to meet folks or advisors that you may not know before and kind of expand your social circle. Often it's just really fun to meet people and chat. It's the best part about conferences.
And just to add to that question, I sometimes get approached, just people would know when I present or I have a poster and will come by. Do you have any thoughts on that way of approaching without even an introduction before? So I personally don't mind. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I don't mind after a talk. I think it's challenging, like depending on the timing for the poster, just because sometimes there's a ton of people and you're like, you want to continue the conversation, but someone else comes and you're like, you feel this like obligation to tell them about the poster or something. But I think it's totally fine. Then you could just be bold. I like the idea of it.
So we can move on to another question regarding finding an advisor when you have multiple choices. So if you have the freedom, as expressed here, to choose among several professors, how would you compare between hands-on versus hands-off professors? Federico, do you want to take this on,
Yeah,
and then
I'm
others
trying
can
to, I think
add in?
it depends on like which kind of person are you. Like it depends on like on how you wanna do the somehow PhD, and which kind of autonomy and which kind of like liberty you wanna have when you do stuff. Obviously, hands-on is very good when you need a lot of guidance at the start, and hands-off is better when you feel confident in what you do and you want just like a feedback once in a while or high level kind of detail. So I think that like it mostly depends on which kind of person you are, and both are good because both have definitely like their pros, and both can have their cons, obviously. But I think like it strongly depends on which kind of person which kind of person you think you are in a research setting.
Do you want to add to that, Divya or David?
Yeah, I have some thoughts here. So if one thing we can do is to ask the professor to put us in touch with the lab mates in the university, and if they are okay, we can talk to the lab mates and see whose style we like better, and like also about other stuff. So there may be non-academic stuff that you are interested in, like attending a diversity conference and stuff. I've seen professors who like attending those conferences, and some professors do not want their students to go to those conferences. Right? So this is just an example. So we can talk to the lab and see which lab fits us. So yeah, first the professor, next the lab, and then you can also look for activities like reading groups and what they do as a lab together. So yeah, that could help us make a decision there.
This also, like my PhD advisor was very hands-off, and I found that very challenging for me personally at the start. It does give you a lot of freedom, but I think that there are so many different programs out there, or PhD programs, and I think that the mentoring has to come from somewhere when you start out in a PhD program. So you may have a hands-off advisor, but you may have a hands-on postdoc in the lab, or you may have like a really active research group with a hands-off advisor who like your peers help provide that mentoring and like just how to be a better researcher. So I would say, thinking about where is your mentoring and feedback going to come from, and I think it's a harder path to go where you're completely, truly isolated, like the only advisee for a hands-off advisor. And it can also be equally just intense if you're the only advisee for a very hands-on advisor. But it's more than just the advisor, and sort of thinking about the ecosystem in which you operate. Like, are there program milestones that help you keep on track, or like, is there a good reading group? Like Divya suggested. So I'm looking for those in choosing a program and advisor, like a more holistic point of view.
And just to add to that, I think it's, as Divya pointed, talking to peers in a way that's the best way to figure out who the advisor is and what the advisor does. Because in a way, it's a whole continuum. It's not really hands-on or hands-off. It might be like in between, like hands-on sometime and hands-off some other times, and figuring out.
It can be also a good idea to contact ex-students maybe to see like what they did and like how they feel about their boss, kind of like supervisor. I think that's and people like are always happy to talk about their experience. I think that's a good way to get some kind of reliable feedback on the entire, let's say, PhD experience.
Right. I agree. I think that's a good suggestion in general. Like in a way, I can talk all day long about who am I and what I do, but I always recommend that prospective students, talk to my own students, because that would be a more objective perspective. So we can move on to the next question. Somebody is asking about having completing recently the undergrad, but then wanting to continue research while working full time and then pursuing a PhD later, how to approach this. And I would add, for the theme of our conversation today, how to approach this with respect to finding an advisor. So if there is a gap, maybe, I don't know, working, or is a gap between undergrad and PhD, what would be a good way of approaching this?
So doing research while also working full time, like it's like a
right, and with the goal, that's what the goal is, to pursue a PhD later. So in a way, I mean, I'm translating, but it's someone being in academia with a gap in between. And so how do you engage with an advisor in this situation?
Yeah, I think I would try to find a full-time job which is related to NLP research. So say, for example, in my current job, there are several engineers. I'm assuming the person from a CS background in undergrad. So if you work as an engineer or as a software engineer in a research setting, you'll be exposed to that. And you can use that experience to, approach a new advisor and say that, like, you have experience in this, though you are just engineer there, you can just enhance that experience and make that experience an opportunity. If that is possible.
I'll say sometimes I get emails from students who are like taking a gap year and they want to do independent research. And I say for me as an advisor, that's often challenging because I'm like, my time is already stretched thin, and thinking about external folks is tough. But it doesn't hurt to email if there's someone that you're interested in, that you think maybe there's some side project you can work on then, and thinking about that person as a potential advisor or way to get mentorship. There are other ways you could try to do it. I think trying to take on a full research project on your own is probably like, that's just doing 2 full-time jobs. But there are things like semi-val tasks or shared tasks that kind of help you scope the idea of research, and that can be a way of like Divya said, like making the opportunity from your industrial experience, like that's awesome. Like I did that. Like I totally, that's not like any sort of a bad mark on your CV. But thinking about like, how do I still show that I'm interested or curious about things? That's one way to potentially do it.
And since you both mentioned approaching advisors by email, just as a add-on question, how to go about that? I mean, keeping in mind what David just said, that maybe professors feel stretched and they're already engaged in a million different things and receive lots and lots of emails. What would be a good way of approaching someone in a way that stands out? So it's not like a mass email, it's more like a way that would make a professor actually open that email and react to it.
I'm not a professor, so I think it's like hard for me to kind of answer this question. Generally, I think like you need to balance the darkness of the email and the content. Like you don't want to write like a 3 pages long email, but you also don't want like to write 2 lines saying, "Hi, I'm interested in this." So I think you need to like say that you're obviously interested in the research. You'll be happy to talk more about it. You did something in the field of like you have some papers related, and you'll be happy to talk. Like I think that eventually getting to the point in which you can directly talk with the person is the best solution, because you can't say all in an email, and it's kind of hard to like give all you want to say in that message.
I'll maybe say on the email thing, there are a lot of really good NLP professors and faculty and postdocs even, and it just, and I think the tendency is to look at, okay, what's the best university, and I'll email them and see if I can work with them. But there are a lot of like actively publishing folks at places that maybe you hadn't considered before, and so thinking about reaching out to those folks, they may have like smaller inboxes, so to speak. I think as a, sort of projecting from my experience as a professor, the things I think a lot about are are you curious as a student, and are you able to work independently, especially if it's like this remote thing. And so one way to signal that in the email is to say, hey, I read this paper. Would you be interested in working together to ask these two questions or answer these two questions? So like pitching them something that's kind of the next step of a paper. Hard to do, but sort of, you don't have to be good at it. But the fact that you're thinking about like what's the next step is a strong sign that you're moving along that path of independence. And maybe if they're curious about that, it's a kind of a good way to make sure your research interests are aligned. But that's just some idea. It's a hard road to get that response.
What I could add to it, I think things to avoid is templates, which one can easily tell. So you can tell it's a template that's just filled in. Like, I don't know, I love your work on, and then you fill in whatever paper. So I think that's a no-no. The other thing, which I guess happens more to the minority gender in computer science, like at least looking people up and knowing not to address with dear sir when it's a woman, or maybe the other way around. I don't know if it happens the other way around. So I guess giving signals that you actually care about the person you reach out to. So I guess in a way it's things to avoid. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you avoid those, we'll get a response. So I see a follow-up question on emails. Somebody is asking, I see professors are also replying to Twitter, personal messages. How are professors usually arranging time between email and social media? I don't know, whoever among you is on Twitter, and again, it doesn't have to be necessarily professor, like even say, I know Federico, you are a postdoc now, and Divya, you are a researcher, like how you are splitting time between responding to email or responding to social media.
I tend to not to open Twitter too much because it gets distracting very soon, but that's also like one of my main ways to get like up with recent research. So I'm in this kind of position in which I try to open it like 1 or 2 times a day, and when I get like messages on Twitter, I try to reply. I don't know like how many like communication on Twitter is like less easy than on email, seems like more direct messaging than actual formal email. So I don't know how much people use it to do this kind of introduction. But this is just my experience as a postdoc, so I don't know what professors do.
I think I'm in the same boat. Like, I try not to open it too much. I mean, I try to reply to students regardless of where they message. I think email is probably a better medium, although maybe you catch folks by surprise on Twitter of just like, what's this DM kind of business?
I don't get DMs in Twitter usually, but then I respond to LinkedIn messages. If it's a serious message, I respond to LinkedIn messages. And also, if the email sounds serious, I respond to the message. Usually, before I go to sleep. I don't do that during the day.
All right, well, thank you. I think it's interesting. I don't know if there is a universal strategy. I guess different people have different strategies, different platforms. So let's move on to another question. Assuming that first contact was made, what would you recommend talking about in a first meeting with a potential advisor?
I'll say maybe, so from the advisor side of things, assuming that you're not like already going to the PhD program, I'm assuming this is like the pre-application stage. The advisor probably is thinking about writing grants or having funding or something like this, that they want to move in some direction and they may have funding for it. And so when you're looking at PhD applications, you're kind of like, okay, who wants to do the work that I want to do? So one of the questions you could kind of ask them is, what research are you excited to do next? And so that may give you a sense for like, one, am I interested in this? And, you know, two, like, can I write an application that signals my expertise or ability or independence to do that kind of research so that I stand out in terms of where this professor might be going in the future.
So in a way, seeking more like alignment? Is that what
Yeah.
you're suggesting, David?
I feel like research interest is pretty vague, but if you're like specific to like, what are you going to do next? Or what are you thinking about next? Or what do you think is interesting? Maybe that's a better way of getting at the kind of alignment that will help for grad school admissions.
Do you have other thoughts, Federico or Divya?
No, I think like there is like asking the research interest is important, but also like more general question about labs and people to contact to get other opinions, like getting a first like feeling of how life is in the place you want to go is definitely very important. So yeah, the research interests are like the main component, but I guess you want to also get like a broader kind of view on your future life in that place.
So with that, I think it also depends on which stage one person is. Like it could be a first meeting at a conference when you just met. It could be a first meeting after you got admitted. So now you are sort of in the position of deciding where to join or not. And then the other thing which I was going to specify, we never really said that this session would be only about PhD advising. So in a way, we could also consider other kind of advising. And I think then it might be a different kind of questions. But probably, as you said, its research will be the main discussion, and finding alignment. I think that's something that in general would speak to many people, like how you can get connected even better, considering a potential advisor. So, what do you think are some qualities of a great mentor? You already mentioned also when you introduce yourself and your thoughts, like good communication, good relationship. Are there other things that you would like to add, like main qualities of a great mentor?
One thing that I think is very important is some kind of open-mindedness to novel things. So in a field that like develops very fast as NLP, there's always the need like to look to the next big thing. And I think having someone that also like is happy to try invest some time into something that it's maybe never done is something very important. Like you need to have this kind of like possibility of trying something new that maybe is not like the standard research that has been done in the last 2 years. That would be like the second thing apart from like communication skills and all. And then like I think, yeah, those two are the main two. Then you want to look to more personal, maybe quality, like being a kind and a good human being is also something like very useful when you deal with an advisor. We all know that like a PhD is kind of stressful. You get a lot of rejection, and having someone that like teach you how to go through these stages is very important.
Divya, David, do you have your own characteristics to add for the ideal advisor?
I think a mentor or an advisor would want you to succeed. So we'll be able to catch that in maybe a few months if this person wants you to succeed or not. Like we can get that vibe, I think. Yeah. So and another thing is that we wouldn't want the mentor's ideologies to be imposed on us. Like you might be very different from your mentor, and still you should be able to, like that person should be able to continue, like, not just following their footsteps exactly. You might be different from that person, but they'll help you succeed.
I think I'm going to echo 2 points from each. Like I think one is just kindness. I think that really goes a long way as an advisor. Just when I think of people who are like, oh, that person is known to be a good advisor, they're like exceedingly kind. And some of the ways that manifests is really looking out for their students, like throughout their career. So I think some of my best advisors, like I could still reach out to, and they would be happy to talk with me. I think also thinking like Divya's comment about meeting someone who they are, like that they're not imposing on you, but they're like willing to let you grow and to try to like figure out what works for you, and to communicate that effectively. It's tough. I mean, being an advisor is a tough job, but the fact that they're willing to advise and to communicate that is, I think, a good sign of it.
Oh, thank you. And I would add also like open-mindedness to different styles, like not only open-mindedness to ideas. To me, I think that makes a difference too. Like rather than going, say, only for a certain type of students, being open-minded to work with many different people. And of course, it depends on what one seeks in their relation with an advisor, but that could be as well. So in a way, I think is on thinking of what the students want and then try to find those characteristics in the advisor. So we can move on to the next question. Somebody is asking about the difference between successful senior advisors and junior people. So just following up on the previous question, what qualities should advisee pay attention to? I might have broken out a little.
It's a hard question.
Oh.
I guess I've had both. I think, in my experience, junior folks are a little bit more willing to be kind of in the trenches with you. Like if it's a conference deadline, they're like, all right, we're going to get this in. And they, stay up really late trying to get that paper in. Whereas senior folks are kind of maybe just, they're over that, that push. But they have different kinds of feedback or guidance. So maybe it's more high level or more visionary. And I don't think that either one is a bad type of advisor to have. They both have like definite strengths. And it's pretty rare to have an advisor to have both of those like desires to be very hands-on and like also senior. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what qualities that stand out between the two.
Maybe like it's not qualities, but other like kind of things. Senior people might have more funding, and that's something you might want to take in consideration. Senior people tend to have bigger networks, and that's something you inherit. So your supervisor network can become your network sooner or later. So that's something you might want to take in consideration. And this is again connected to what obviously David said, but also like on the ends-off, ends-on things we said before. So like it's kind of a problem that has like different variables, and you want to like check which one you want to somehow get, and those that you're not gonna get. Obviously.
So as another follow-up, people often say that good advisor would have good vision. What do you actually mean by that? So David, you just mentioned that. What kind of, I mean, in a way, even just explaining what kind of vision would be like a vision for the field. I'm adding that myself. Or a vision for a PhD dissertation, or a vision for the next paper. Like, what do you mean by having a good vision?
I would say, well, it's easy to say all three. I think Federico was talking a little bit about this earlier with thinking about the field as a whole, like where the trend, like NLP is a fast moving field. And so where is it heading in next year or 5 years or 10 years? Can you kind of see where that is, and making sure that the work that you'll do in your PhD is relevant and impactful and maybe like helps lead that advance? I think senior folks often have a bigger perspective of that, which is helpful. I think all advisors should have vision at the paper of like, how do I craft a narrative, which is really hard. Like I would say many faculty are still working on this, myself included. But sort of learning how to do that. I remember literally watching an overleaf where my advisor was editing some paper and being like, wow, how did they do that? It was amazing. It's just like it transformed this introduction from like good to excellent. And I think learning that skill from a good advisor is priceless. And it's something that's kind of intangible, but when you see it, you're like, wow, that was really, how did it look that easy? I don't know how to pick it out though. I mean, I wish I did. I'd be a better advisor if I did.
All right, so I see we have more questions coming in, so we can maybe move on. I mean, if you have anything to add, Federico or Divya, please do. Otherwise, I can move on to the next question. So we have a question from somebody who has an interest in the intersection of two areas, specifically HCI and NLP. And they will be starting a PhD in the fall with an advisor working in HCI. And they would like, with the advisor permission, to also find an NLP faculty, but there is no NLP faculty there. So I think it's a combined question. One is about finding a second advisor. The other is also finding an advisor at a different school. So if the school they are at does not have that expertise. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, it's always good to...
Federico, do you want to start?
Yeah.
I know you graduated from a business department, so maybe...
like, I think it's good to find
if you
like,
wanted to start.
someone that like can support you and like another maybe faculty. It depends mostly like if you're allowed to do this, I guess that it makes total sense to reach out to someone and find an NLP faculty from outside your kind of like department or even university, and try to organize that. It might be also your first advisor that can reach out to another faculty and say, I have the students, is working well on this stuff, he wants to do the NLP, do you think we can advise him together? That would be like my first idea.
I guess I'll also say, I think if you're working with a new advisor, I mean, congrats on getting into a PhD program. Maybe focusing just on HCI or your main, I think when you're in this interdisciplinary space, it's tough because you have these two tensions, like making one, your first paper, working with your advisor, learning your advisor's style before moving us into a second advisor can often help you learn how to navigate and communicate effectively before like creating this like other, I mean, there will be kind of tension in terms of like where the direction heads. Often it's productive, but maybe thinking about doing that as like the second paper of your PhD instead of the first, but just an idea.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, having multiple advisors has the advantage of getting more advice, obviously. So getting more ideas, suggestions help. But as David pointed out, it's also the other side of it, like maybe people pulling in different directions and especially being in different fields. So it's probably a good suggestion to start with one and then add the other. And that then could be done as a team. So somebody, the advisor would know, or together you decide on that. So it would be a more coherent team. But in general, I think having interdisciplinarity, that's helping. And just to second David, congrats on the admission. That's exciting. So another question is asking, as I mentioned previously, this is not exclusively for PhD students. Maybe that's where we see most of the advice, but in other career stages. So somebody is asking if assistant professors find mentors, and generally how do people go about finding mentors mid-career stage?
I guess that one's to me. I'll say I'm very fortunate at the University of Michigan that when you show up, you're kind of assigned a committee of advisors to start helping you. Rada, in fact, was on my committee, so thanks, Rada, for being my advisor at some one point. And then we get assigned faculty mentors, and I think this is like the start of your mentoring network, but has not stopped me from reaching out to other folks. I think that's true whether you're in a PhD program or assistant professor or an industry, that like the person who's directly above you does not have to be your only mentor, and like reaching out to other folks really, really helps. I worked at a industrial research lab for a few years, and I had my main mentor, but I had other mentors, and they were really, really helpful for thinking about how to think about problems and like navigate the bureaucracy of many things. So I think that's a lot of it is managing up because everyone's busy, but sort of reaching out to who you want to learn from. And I think it's true regardless of where you're at in your career.
And in general, I think it's natural human tendency to help others, want to help others or give advice. I mean, obviously, when you look for a PhD advisor, that's a long commitment, so it's 5 years, so it's a little bit different than just asking for advice, like, oh, how about this, I don't know, funding opportunity, or how about getting engaged in this direction or whatnot. So more like a one-time advice. I think generally I found that people are very willing to give that. So it's mostly a matter of reaching out and asking, more so than finding somebody who's willing to do that.
I was curious, Divya, what's it like for you in terms of like mentoring, advising in industry?
I still talk about stuff with my professor, my supervisor, and my lab mates. So especially as I started in the beginning of pandemic, there is this gap about receiving mentorship within the industry. Like I haven't been going to the office for like since the beginning. So yeah, I myself am struggling there. So what I do is I usually listen to people. Like I may not know somebody in person, but I collectively take information from different people and do that, like go there. And I do have this that like my alumni, right? Like my team from the university, and I talk to them. That's what I do.
Nice. I think the pandemic didn't really help with forming connections, and from what I understand, you haven't been there like at your current workplace for a long time, so probably you haven't had the chance to connect very well yet. So another question that we have is, aside from helping with research questions, which is what typically research advisors would do, what would be other reasonable expectations from an advisor?
I think that like I will focus on the PhD, but the PhD is not just research; it's also like reading papers, is also like doing sometimes exams and studies. So I think there is a bunch of also administrative kind of thing on which your advisor can help, and also like David was mentioning this about writing, like what the advisor is gonna teach you how to write, how to do scientific writing. That is very different from like standard writing we are generally used to. So I think there are all the things in the PhD life that can be considered something that an advisor might have some advice on and allow you to improve in different directions. Also, like question how to do literature search, for example. Like there are a bunch of things that like go beyond the standard research questions, I guess.
Yeah, other reasonable expectations could be getting recommendation letters, helping with applying for fellowships, PhD fellowships, and maybe like job itself, like helping you connecting with their network. I think those are reasonable.
Yeah, I think thinking about your PhD is not as like just like how do I crank out like X number of papers, but like how do I become the kind of person that I need to be for the next role. So whether that's like academia or industry, like so my students, for example, the ones that want to go into industry, like am I getting them the industrial connections or the internships to help them make those ties or put them into place? Or for ones that want to go more academic, like do they know how to write a grant? Like, do they know how like funding models work? Do they get a chance to mentor other students to sort of practice that their own advising relationship and sort of learn that in a structured way? So I think like, what do you want to do, and how do we make sure that the advisor kind of gives you those skills to make you like the holistic person, not just the person that can crank out like 3 ACL papers in a year? Because it turns out the skill set you need once you transition to being an advisor, I mean, whether it's industry or academia, it's like a huge superset of the small piece that got you there.
In a way, I think a way to summarize it's what Divya mentioned early on, like help you succeed. So I guess everything that comes with helping you succeed. And I don't know that you would put it necessarily under expectations, but in general, you would hope that an advisor will help you succeed and do everything that would come with that. So in terms of working with advisors, a question is about how advisors would manage to take care of the advisees in spite of often a busy schedule. Some people, for instance, only have very little time to meet. So how would, thinking from the advisor's side, how would advisors take care of their mentees?
I guess here it depends a lot on like the advisor time, and like we said, there is all like this junior and senior figure. How big is the lab? Like if you're the only somehow mentee, you're gonna have probably a lot of time with your advisor. So I think it depends a lot on how many people are in the lab, and the idea is you want to like make the time matter. So if you have 30 minutes every 2 weeks, you want to be the one that is somehow prepared and like can ask all the questions you need an answer to do progress. So it's like I believe, like, and this is how I did it, you should use this moment a kind of like a milestone to progress. So you have 30 minutes, you try to solve all the doubts, and if there are more doubts, I think it's like it's reasonable to ask for more time. Like I think an advisor can find more time. You won't need like 2 hours every week. And I mean, maybe there's one time to have more time to discuss. So I think like most of people can reasonably adapt different settings. I don't know if like the others have another opinion on this.
Maintaining a live document works. So every week or maybe every 2 weeks to get 30 minutes, you can have 3 different things. One is what you did the previous week, what kind of mentoring or what kind of research questions you have to ask the mentor or your supervisor, and next what you plan to do for the coming week. And like it could be a few lines, maybe like 5 or 10 lines, or maybe a few bullet points, a live document with your date. And you can it's not just for talking with your advisor, but also knowing what you have done, like tracking your own progress. And maybe when you are talking with your advisor, there may be a shift in idea, and you can like write it down immediately and work on that, and then come back the next time, and you can keep discussing. That way, you know what you have done, and that's what that's what I usually do. And you can share the document with the professor itself, and maybe the day before or maybe a few hours before your meeting, you can just remind them to look into the document or share the link again, and they can quickly go. Like, don't make it too big, a few lines a bit.
Yeah, I'm gonna like 100% second that suggestion. That, like, I mean, hopefully your advisor would have more than 30 minutes. I think that every other week, like that should be the rarity. That I think you should ask for more time if that's the case, especially if you're just starting out. But if that is the case, that you have limited time, like being prepared, living documents, meeting notes, slides, something that you are ready to like take advantage of that is critical, especially from the advisor side of the context switch of like, all of a sudden I'm in a new meeting and I'm like, what were we talking about? It's been 2 weeks. And being able to quickly get up to speed on like, what's the key next step that we're about to take. I think that helps a lot for being able to give quality advice and make the most of it.
And I would add that in general, I think it's helpful for the student to drive the meetings and agenda as opposed to the other way around. So even if it's more than 30 minutes every other week, so if it's, I don't know, 2 hours every week or whatnot, I think having the student being prepared and driving as opposed to the professor driving, it just changes how things are going. So who's leading and who's helping? From my point of view, the student is leading and the professor is helping rather than the other way around. So there is a question about what happens if you have to change advisor, and that can happen. If you, for instance, in the middle of a PhD, if one has to change an advisor because of a mismatch, what are some things to keep in mind when making the switch? Any thoughts?
I had to switch advisors my first year. Like I was doing computer architecture. I'm really bad at computer architecture. I should never have done that. It's an awkward question to start. Like I think it's but I think that you have to have it. And I've heard this phrase that like life is your maturity is measured in terms of the number of awkward conversations you have or something like this, or uncomfortable conversations. It's uncomfortable, but it becomes very comfortable really quick, because I think your advisor 100% of the time wants to support you as a person. And that may mean that they're not your like research advisor, and they're just an external person that like is a cheerleader for you. I've had some advisees for me who wanted to move in different directions, and I'm like, this is great. So I think having that conversation as soon as you feel like you've made up your mind, or even if you're not certain, talking with your advisor about that early or often is pretty important, and not trying to like hide and be like, I'm not sure, because I think that's probably what I did, and it's not as useful for either party to like dance around the question of research fit.
Other thoughts, Federico or Divya, even if you haven't experienced that yourself on switching advisors?
Yeah, I think mental health is very important. It's not just about changing track. Sometimes it shouldn't just work with your supervisor, and it's okay to change. I think I've known like several, at least a few people who changed and they were happy after changing the mentor. So I think the thing is you need to be transparent with your current mentor or the advisor that you're actually looking to work with, and let them know what happened and what you were expected and why you couldn't do that, and what kind of mentorship are you expecting from this person. Like, you don't want the next relationship to fail, so make sure that this is exactly what did not work between us, and I'm looking for guidance in this particular relationship. So that could be helpful, and if possible, try to be cordial with your previous mentor as well, like previous advisor as well. Yeah. And also, when you move to a new advisor, ask them the expectations, and like maybe they want you to publish maybe a paper or two before you graduate. And when, like, most people want to graduate, and that's why they quickly change the like their PhD advisors. So like, if you're doing that, ask them when it is possible for you to graduate. Like, ask very specific questions, and like make sure that you will be satisfying the expectations of the new advisor. Like, don't make the same mistake twice.
And I would second that comment on transparency. I mean, the advisors eventually are colleagues and will be colleagues for a long time to come. So they will probably not want to step on each other's toes. So even from that point of view, I think transparency is important, that everyone is on board with the change. And the other thing that probably would be also important is expectations, and also if there is any change, like if it's, say, like the question was about happening in the middle of the PhD, will there be any change with respect to timeline, like the timeline of the PhD? Will there be a topic change? I think those are other things which doesn't have to do necessarily with the advisors themselves, just the change, and having clarity on that. Situation that I've been in, and it was all fine, but maybe the student is having a paper with the previous advisor, and whether they are open to continue publishing that or not. So those, to the extent that they are discussed up front, I think it's better than having them linger around and create hard feelings. So we have one more question, and it might be the last question, on when you try to find a research advisor and you are interested in their general research, but you're not currently sure what kind of research project you would pursue, how to approach an advisor. So concretely, how to write an email, but I guess you could approach it at the conference as well. When you are interested in the general research team, but you are not necessarily sure on what project you would work on.
Yes, or maybe take a few more weeks and think about how you could actually do.
that's a good point. And taking more time and thinking about it, it's always good.
I think that like if you are at conference and you can start talking, then you can ask which are the possible like kind of project that the lab is focusing on, and that will be like a starting point on which you can start thinking of which could be your contribute to the project itself. That's a good way, but also like even reading a paper and thinking about which are the possible like next steps from a paper. That's already something like that shows that you have done the first step, like you read the paper from the group, you understood it, and you like ask question about the paper and look at how you can like improve on that direction. That would be like one thing that I would appreciate, because it shows like there is interest and there is like the motivation to like try to solve the problems maybe in a novel way.
I'll quickly add, I think one thing to think about is what makes you special. Like, what's your secret sauce? And there are many different ways to have that. Like maybe you took some cool class, or you like are an English major, or like you're really good at some Python library. You're really good at JAX programming. I don't know. And so thinking about like, how do you sell yourself as having something that can contribute to the pool? And where do you think, like in general, where do you think you might be like having shared interests? So kind of pitching yourself, like selling yourself as like an interesting person to the group. Maybe you don't know what to focus on specifically, but that you have a lot to add.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And I think sometime we mentioned that before, connecting to people in the lab. I mean, I'm not suggesting like sneaky ways, but it would be like really just connecting to other people, having conversations with others, and that would help in terms of figuring out what would be a good research project. So with that, we are right on time. I would say as just a final note, just thinking everyone can be an advisor themselves. We mentioned just in passing mentorship. I do actually think that mentorship grows both the mentor and the mentees. So thinking that you could advise yourself, somebody right now, and how would you be a great advisor, then that in turn can help you find a great advisor yourself. So it's going both ways. So thinking about who you could help right now and in which ways, that would also help answer the other questions. So with that, many thanks to our panelists. Thanks to Federico, Divya, David. Zillion thanks to Jijing for always supporting our mentorship program. And thanks to everyone in the audience for all your great questions. And we'll see you at the next session.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.